Your go-to sports talk from your own backyard. This is SS Tampa Bay.
Hey everyone, welcome back to SS Tampa Bay. I am your host, Zach Seifter, joined by my good friend, Harrison Smadjevitz, and we are back with yet another episode, and we got a lot to talk about today. Harrison, how are you doing, bud?
I'm doing pretty good, Zach. Another week has come and gone, and I'm in a good mood. Classes are done, and I'm ready for summer. A lot of focusing on this show.
Yeah, man, another school year in the books for us Florida Gators. You know, it's been a weird semester, this final spring semester in 2020, and, but hey, we finished strong. We were resilient, and just looking to the future, man. And honestly, hoping that our future, hopefully the near future, includes some sports.
Yes, and one of these upcoming futures, Zach, involves baseball, which, in my opinion, is one of the greatest things I have heard in the bits. And it's got really...
And we got yet another MLB reopening plan, or at least a rumored plan. Nothing official yet, but we do got, some ideas being thrown out there.
Yeah, and this one's definitely a lot more concrete than the one we talked about last episode. It was very basic. Florida, Texas, Arizona, done. This one has like a full division layout, possible return dates.
Yeah, up until this one happens, though, I'm going to be watching the Korean Baseball League that ESPN is about to start airing.
Oh, I'm totally on it, too. I'm going to get up at 7 a.m. and watch live baseball. You know me. I will do it. No DVRing, live events. I'm watching it. I'm narrowing it down. Do I root for the Samsung Lions or the Kia Tigers?
Don't know who any of those teams are. I know X-Ray Hank Conger is a part of one of those teams. So whoever he's on, I'm going to make sure to root against because he was a bum in Tampa. So, I might as well, root against him for all the crap he produced with the Rays.
Yeah, I can definitely go for that. Maybe, but root for the team that had JP Arancibia if he was in the KBO because the month he was with us was pretty good.
That's true. That is true. But anyway, Harrison, let's dig into this plan. Let's talk about it. The MLB, 3 divisions, 10 teams apiece, which is kind of odd, and it would involve teams eventually getting to play in their home stadiums. Correct?
Yes. Everyone plays in their home ballparks. No fans. There's no details on this, but I'm assuming they would try and make it feel as much like a regular game as possible because that's what they're doing over in Taiwan, and they want to do over in Korea as well. There is no interdivision / league, whatever it is, at all. You play only the teams in your division. That's it. You travel there and back. Done.
It's definitely an interesting plan. I know people, particularly the MLB, were emphasizing minimizing travel. I guess if you keep everyone in their division, you do that in a way. Probably not as effectively as you would if you had everyone play in the same state. But this works. So, let's talk about the Rays a little bit. Obviously, this is a Tampa Bay podcast. Our local baseball team is the Rays. What does this look like for them?
Well, I'm happy you said that because I was going to focus on the Rays division specifically. They will play still in the East. We know it's just the East. No name. It's not like hockey where they might call it like the Prince of Jeter division or something. But
Prince of Wales, whatever it is. So it's basically just a combination of the AL East and the NL East, but no conferences essentially.
Well, one exception to that. It would be the American League East and the National League East, but instead the Atlanta Braves are in the Central and the Pirates are in the East. And the logic behind that is that Pittsburgh is a little bit farther east than Atlanta, though it's such a minimal amount of difference that you could have just done the Braves in the East and the Pirates in the West, not the West, the Central. But I get it. In such a pressing time when you really want to minimize travel as much as possible, you have two Pennsylvania teams next to each other. Pittsburgh is a lot closer to New York, Baltimore, Washington than Atlanta is to those cities. And
when you look at the East, the only 2 teams, really in the southern portion of the country in that Eastern division are the Rays and Marlins. So when you look at the Mets, the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Nationals, the Orioles, the Phillies, and the Blue Jays, who's closer? Atlanta or Pittsburgh? Pittsburgh is clearly closer. They're more of that northeastern kind of city. And like I said, one of the keys is minimizing travel. So I think, Obviously, it doesn't help the Rays in this case, that they got to go, a bit further than, say Pittsburgh would, having to go to Philly, unless, the Rays are playing the Marlins. It's a little more travel time. Not so much that it's, significant, really, but I mean, I understand why it's Pittsburgh as opposed to Atlanta. On the East Coast, a little closer to your northeastern teams than Atlanta would. So, geographically, it makes sense when you look at the MLB's, what they're emphasizing is minimizing travel. So it makes sense in that way.
Yeah, and honestly, this is probably the best you can get when you have only 3 Southern teams. It's not like the NFL where you have Carolina, New Orleans, Tampa, and Miami, less than 2-hour flights for all these cities, no matter what. You have the Braves, which are Atlanta's relatively close to Texas, I guess, and some of these other, well, not Texas, they're in the West, actually, my mistake. But I guess they're relatively close, like Kansas City, Cincinnati, if you really need to stretch it out that far.
Right.
And St. Louis. I mean, yeah, like Minnesota is as far as it can get from Atlanta, but it could be worse. They could be going to Los Angeles.
I agree. I can get on board with, replacing Philadelphia. I'm sorry, not Philadelphia. Pittsburgh with Atlanta, just geographically what the MLB is trying to do. It makes sense. Like we said, AL East, NL East, you swap Pittsburgh and Baltimore, or Pittsburgh and Atlanta. The West is just the NL West and the AL West in one division. In the Central, the NL Central and the AL Central, but you add Atlanta into the mix as opposed to Pittsburgh. So 3 divisions, 10 teams, you only play each other. I just don't know what a playoff format's going to look like with this, though.
There's no information on playoffs at all, and honestly, I think they're keeping that as much of a secret as possible. I've been doing some math. To keep the playoffs exclusive, there have to be bye weeks in there. You have a 16-team playoff. Lowest number that's close to half is possible. I guess a 16-team playoff isn't crazy, but I don't see the MLB going to that large of a number. Maybe 12 with a couple of bye weeks in there.
I mean, how do you determine who goes to the World Series when you have? I mean, these 3 divisions to me just look like 3 conferences in a way. If you take 3 division winners and maybe 1 wild card, or maybe you take the 2 top teams from each division and then the 2 best wild cards afterwards, maybe that works. And then you just battle it out, maybe like NHL or NBA style with a series where it's like 1 seed versus 8 seed, 2 versus 7, that something like that. That might work, but it's not going to be like your typical MLB playoff format where you have two conferences, the American League and the National League. You have 3 division winners, 2 wild cards, 2 of them battle it out in a wild card game, and then you get 4 teams per conference, essentially. And then the top to make the World Series. You're going to have to go maybe something like the NHL format, where what they do is top 3 teams from each division per conference, and then 2 wild cards. But maybe just do that for the top league, and then you have 8 playoff teams.
You could do seeding. It's just you have to figure out, is there an incentive to win the division in this setup? And really, how you decide the World Series, seeding is definitely going to be a factor there. If you do in the sense where it's like 3 division winners and a wild card team, you can't have it where you just arbitrarily decide East and West play each other and then the 2 Central teams play each other, because then you have 1 Central team in the World Series guaranteed when the East and West kind of have to duke it out to actually earn a spot.
Well, so also, something to me that's interesting also that I think that we need to look at is how do maybe tiebreakers go into effect in the playoffs? I mean, if you have 2 division winners that have the same record, but you only play teams within your division, how do you determine who might get home field in a series? So things like that. I mean, maybe home record or something. You have to do something to determine who's going to get home field. Otherwise, I mean, you would hope that everyone finishes with different records that you don't even have to worry about it. But that's definitely something to keep an eye on, is how do you work out tiebreakers along with, obviously the teams that do make the playoffs, because you have to have a playoff format. And I believe the MLB will come up with one. But how do you determine who is seated where otherwise than besides record? Because if 2 teams have the same record and they're both division winners, what do you do then?
It might just have to be, who knows, what's your run differential? It'd have to be a really obscure way of doing it, because a lot of the options they normally have are just not there. You can't do head-to-head unless it's within your division, which you're hoping is not the case at all in the World Series, even though it very well could be.
You're absolutely right. So, obviously this plan, while, is interesting, we're going to need some answers, obviously, before, going forward to see what exactly is going to be going on, playoff format, tiebreakers, and just the whole structure of it. 10, obviously 3 divisions, 10 teams is kind of cool. You see some combos and you're going to see some different matchups than we're used to seeing, but there's definitely some questions that need to be answered.
I agree, and you never know. Maybe they end up changing the divisions just to fix some of this. You have 3. I did the math just now, by the way. 30 divided by 4 is 7.5. There's no such thing as half teams. You might have to align it in a very specific way so that you can get an extra division in there, just for the sake of not dealing with 2 teams in the World Series at the same time, or even a wild card team for that matter. And it also just makes setting up the playoffs easier, because if you have 2 from 4 divisions, that's automatically 8. We don't need a longer playoff necessarily in the time where you're worried about travel.
8 playoff teams is probably the best way to go about it, just because that's typically how it's run. The National League gets 3 division winners and then a wild card. The American League gets 3 division winners and then a wild card. 8 total teams, then you battle it out from there. But I think the MLB definitely needs to figure this out sooner than later, because the clock is ticking on this season, and if they don't get something figured out quick, it could be this format, it could be something else. Might not have a season. Obviously, no one hopes that's the case. I'm optimistic that there will be an MLB season, but whether it's this point or something else, it's gotta take action quickly.
There's pretty much nothing saying there won't be a season. They're pretty set on it. I think based on this announcement, no matter what happens, there will be baseball by July 4th. It might not be this setup, but it's going to be by that time. They want baseball on 4th of July. We don't know if there's an all-star game. Let's just keep that in mind.
That's true.
It's
going to have to be condensed in some kind of way.
Well, eliminating the all-star break entirely allows for more games to be played. There's 2 scenarios. One is the worst-case scenario where they just cancel the all-star game. It's not played for the first time ever.
Right.
There have been strike seasons and everything since 1933, which was the first year they had the All-Star game.
Exactly.
And it was played.
I mean, it's definitely going to be kind of a weird season if there is no All-Star game. I mean, obviously, the MLB is going to have to make do with the cards that they're dealt. It'll still be weird. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to miss the Home Run Derby. I'm going to miss the All-Star game. I'm going to miss all the festivities. It's fun. It's cool. I would be lying if I told you that I wasn't looking forward to the Home Run Derby every year, every summer. It's a fun time, but the MLB's got to do what they got to do. And like you said, I have not seen or heard any indication that there won't be a season, and I don't believe that's going to be the case. I truly believe there will be a season and that we will be watching baseball within the next 2 months. It's just a matter of how the MLB is going to do it. And, we'll see what their scenario, what their plan is. This is just one of quite a few that we've seen. But I would say that this 3-division one is by far probably my favorite, because it does allow teams to play in their home their home parks. It's definitely, until further notice, a question mark, really.
Honestly, I think this is the most realistic option that there is right now, just because you have the situation where players don't want to get locked in a bubble for 4 months. And I know a hotel is probably the best way to do it. Dr. Fauci was really big on it. It was even on ESPN, that exact phrasing, hotels, weekly testing. But if you do home ballparks, at least you go home every night, you go to the stadium, that's it. I think players would be totally fine with that, as long as they can see their families. Or maybe there are even new families. Mike Trout has a kid on the way. He even said he will not miss that. It could result in Mike Trout not playing for a year if you don't do it this way. And is it worth having a baseball season without your biggest stars, star, plural, or singular?
Well, it's interesting because, you can't. How can you really ask these players to give up their families and to give up things like the birth of their children to play baseball for a few months? A lot of players aren't going to go for it. And ultimately, if you don't have the players really sign off on it or agree to it, are you really going to have a season? So I think that the MLB's plan here that allows players to be in their home cities and be with their families, be in their homes and all that, is the best course of action, just because, you're going to get a lot more players to sign off on a plan that allows them to be home and be with their families as opposed to in isolation in a hotel with their teammates for 4 or 5 months where they can't see their families. They do have to miss things like that. I think, in terms of getting the players to sign off, this is the best plan. Is it the safest that we've seen? I'm not the one to really say. I'm not a health expert. I don't know really are the significant differences or risks involved in a plan like this as opposed to playing in Florida or Arizona or Texas. I don't know, how they plan on keeping these players in isolation, yada, yada, yada. I don't know the difference. But I can tell you in terms of getting players to sign off on a plan, this is the best one.
Yeah, and just getting back to the All-Star game for a minute, Zach, the best case scenario probably at this point that I've heard is that it's played after the season's over in like December. And it could be a really fun way to send off the season. Normally we always see the championship and that's it. You watch the parade sometimes on TV if that's your team. But this could be a way for Major League Baseball to have a finale that's suitable for every fan.
I mean, at that point, you kind of make it like the NFL with the Pro Bowl. After the regular season's over, the week before the Super Bowl, it used to be the week after the Super Bowl that the Pro Bowl was played. Up until years ago, when they changed that they gave the teams a bye week after the conference championship games in between the Super Bowl, the Pro Bowl was played. So it's kind of neat to see all the best players of the season gathered, in a spot to play in the Pro Bowl and do all the festivities and things like that at the end of the season. It could be really cool for Major League Baseball. It really could. It could be fun. It could be a way to kind of send off what's been, already a crazy season in turn, and I say season because spring training had already kicked off. It was 2 weeks in, so I guess we're kind of in the midst of this season already. But I mean, it could be a really cool way just to kind of end it, a nice finale, just where all the players can kind of, send it goodbye, have a fun kind of thing in December, and hopefully at that point the fans get to be part of it, which could be really neat. I don't think that's necessarily going to sit there and become the norm for the MLB. I think that after the season, hopefully the MLB is. I believe they're going to try to get back to some sort of normal schedule next year, but for the time being, it could be a really fun thing for the MLB to do.
Yeah, I think the idea for next season is 100% they go back to normal. Everyone wants just to go back to normal once this is all over. But for this year, it's nice, especially in such a tough year. Just picture for a second. World Series is done. You have an all-star game. And when the game is over, all the fans come out. Not all the fans, the players come out on the field, whether no fans or not. And they kind of do like a thank you to everyone, hats off, music playing. A nice, wholesome ending to probably one of the most crucial seasons in baseball history when played.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's been a crazy year already. Just with the coronavirus and everything that has happened because of it, and for all the players to gather and kind of do something almost to honor those that have helped so much, and just kind of pay tribute to everyone who made it happen, who will make a season happen. It could be something that's really cool. The MLB will probably have to look into what exactly would go into that. But I would imagine that if the MLB could pull that off, especially if they can get fans into the stadiums, it would be a really neat way to send off the season. And I would definitely be on board with the MLB doing something like that.
Yeah, and I think on that note, as a way to send it off, let's move on to our next topic. It's a bit of an interesting one, but it's Rays related, and I think it'd be a nice conversation point. So CBS Sports today released an article about the 5 best curveballs in baseball. 2 of the top 3 were Rays pitchers. Number 1, Charlie Morton, and number 3, Tyler Glasnow. And Glasnow made that list despite the fact that he only had about 8 starts last season. It's a decent sample size list to get a curveball, but, he's on the map.
It's not surprising. I mean, the Rays obviously year in, year out typically have one of the best pitching staffs in baseball, whether it's starting pitching or the bullpen or anything like that. And I'm going to be honest, I'm a little surprised that Blake Snell is not on that list. And I'll tell you why. I understand that he had a bit of a down year last year coming off his Cy Young award-winning season in 2018, but I'm going to be honest, when he is on his game and when he's at his best, I don't know that you're going to find a better curveball in all of baseball. I mean, his curveball is disgusting. And I'm going to argue that, when he's at his best, it's better than Charlie Morton's and Tyler Glasnow's.
Any other year, yes. After last year, it's really hard to argue. The thing about Tyler Glasnow, though, is that we really only just got to see it. Blake Snell, we're a little biased with the fact that he's been around since 2016, and we've watched it develop. Glasnow's came out of nowhere, and it's already disgusting, filthy, however you want to put it. That thing falls off the table and goes to the center of the earth.
I can agree. I mean, and don't get me wrong. I would stand up here and argue, with anyone that wants to sit there and talk anything about Tyler Glasnow. I mean, even if injuries, what happened in Houston in 2 games, blah blah. He's a great pitcher. I mean, very good pitcher. He's got a ways to go to be great, but he's a very good young starting pitcher. I mean, the Rays robbed the Pirates in that Chris Archer trade for Glasnow and Austin Meadows. I don't think anyone can argue. He's got his ceiling is unbelievably high as a starting pitcher, and I love Tyler Glasnow. He's got a great curveball. I just happen to think that at the top of this game, Blake Snell is by far the best pitcher on this team.
You can argue we have 3 Cy Young aces on this team. Charlie Morton's curveball, which we actually haven't talked about, is absolutely disgusting too. And
Charlie
honestly,
Morton put this
I'm not
team on his back in a way last year.
It was his go-to pitch last year, and I'm not going to argue that it might be the best in baseball as well. It was his best swing and miss pitch. It was his best first pitch. Don't get me wrong, he's got a good fastball and a changeup and all that, but that was his curveball is what he was known the most for. He was the only consistent starter last year for the Rays. He was the only one that didn't go on the disabled list. We saw it the most for the whole season. If we're talking about right now, he gets it. And I know I'm saying that after I just defended Tyler Glasnow's curveball, but in the sense I'm defending why he's in the top 3 over Blake Snell, which is who you brought up first.
Which is understandable. I mean, Charlie Morton deserves all the credit in the world for what he did last year just in terms of his performance. He was a Cy Young nominee coming off an unbelievably good season. He really put this pitching staff on his back and led the way when, he was really the only reliable starter for the Rays last year. Snell obviously battled his own injuries, and, I'm not sure how much of the season he spent healthy. He took a step back after his Cy Young year. Glasnow, as we noted, was, injured for much of the season, didn't return until very late in the season, and pitched late season early in the postseason after, a superb start to the regular season back in April and May. But Charlie Morton was really the only consistent starter here. And he was outstanding for most of it, especially, when he was the only one. He was the only one in the rotation, and then you got 4 nights of an opener. So, I mean, Charlie Morton deserves all the credit in the world. He deserves to be on this list, and, he deserves to be on the list of best pitchers in the MLB.
I agree. And, the thing about Tyler Glasnow, though, is let alone did he have a good April and May. He had forearm tightness, had several setbacks, came back, and pitched just as well as before he got hurt. He didn't pitch as much, obviously, because he could only pitch 2 or 3 innings a game. But he continued to look dominant. And I think that shows a lot about him is that he was just able to come back and keep dealing. And you can make an argument Snell was going to have that bounce back too. Really, the only bad month he had was the month of June when he had a 20 ERA, and then the rest was very solid. It's just he got hurt. Even when he came back, he was pitching rather solid too. And in the playoffs, he closed out a game for the Rays. And one I think is probably the most underrated pitcher in the entire staff. It's a bit of a gutsy prediction here, or not prediction, hot take, I should say. Yanni Chirinos might be one of the most underrated pitchers on that staff. Dude went out there as an unofficial starter And I'm telling you now, he's a starter. If he's a reliever, he's not pitching well at all. You give him a chance to pace himself, and if he can limit home runs next season, he could be the next James Shields when it comes to complete game after complete game.
Well, I will say this, and I can understand your point in that take, just from the fact that Yanni Chirinos, there were times last season when he really showed, his capabilities in terms of being a starting pitcher. I mean, the way he started the season, didn't he start at like 7-2 with an ERA under 2, if I'm not mistaken?
It was around 220 because his bulk guy appearances kept his ERA a bit higher.
Right.
He pitched 7 2/3 innings against the Astros the first start. Then he had 5 scoreless or 5 with like 1 run against the Giants. Then Cash moves him behind the opener and gives up 6 runs. So immediately his ERA shoots up. If I recall I believe I looked at the numbers at one point. When he was a reliever, his ERA was almost 5. When he was a starter, it was close to the lower end of the 2s. I think the reason behind that is, and like I mentioned earlier, it comes down to pacing. Starters need to pace themselves, whereas relievers can go out there and just chuck a pitch. And when given the opportunity to go out there, have a rhythm, be very careful, he's got this.
And I can kind of agree with that. I think Yanni Chirinos has the capability of being a solid pitcher in this rotation. I mean, just from the fact that you do have Glass now, Morton, and Snell, he's obviously not going to be better than the 4th pitcher in the rotation currently, but he definitely showed capabilities. Like you mentioned, he showed the capability of being a starting pitcher in this league and in this rotation. I think there is a spot for him this season. And I definitely think that he could be a player who's on the verge of an outbreak this season. And, obviously we'll find out. But, I don't know necessarily how much of a hot take that is, because I think that there are definitely a lot of people that are in that corner that want to see more of Yanni Chirinos just from what he did show last season.
Well, the reason I think it's maybe a bit of a hot take is because a lot of people are big on Ryan Yarbrough, which, don't get me wrong, I think he's a good pitcher, but I don't think he is the 4th starter on the team. I think he's actually the 5th starter. He wasn't as consistent as Chirinos.
Maybe not. I am myself a fan of Ryan Yarbrough. I do think that, he definitely showed out quite a few games last year. I think he had some quality performances. And my only question with Yarbrough is, does Cash want to abandon the opener role completely and go with the regular 5-man rotation, filling it out with Chirinos and Yarbrough as the last 2 players in that rotation behind, Snell, Glasnow, and Morton?
I think the second half of last season showed that Cash was definitely very open to that decision. He traded away Ryan Stanek. Well, he didn't. The Rays front office did. Stanek was traded at the deadline, and suddenly Yarbrough and Chirinos get pretty much more than half their starts for the whole season. They're both very capable of being the 4th and 5 guys in the rotation. Which one you want to put them in is really more up to you.
No, it's
And
true.
I think
could they go with the 4-man rotation and just keep Yarbrough as maybe a reliever?
I mean, no matter what, it's a 4-man rotation plus an opener. You're not going to see it. You're not going to see a traditional 4-man rotation in which you go with 4 starters and then the ace goes back out the next day. It's not happening. The Rays don't want that. You can argue you'll have a 6-man rotation with the Rays before a 4-man rotation, especially with Brendan McKay coming up.
It's just not Cash's style. He likes his openers, man, and he's shown that he's willing to adapt and to do things differently. And I think the opener kind of fills that and fills what he likes to do. So I definitely wouldn't be surprised to see the opener, situation, the opener return next year, make a return for the Rays, even if they do roll with a 4-man rotation.
Well, that's the thing, though. It's not will it come back. We know it's coming back. It's just how often. And I think there is a 5-man rotation next year, but it's not going to be guaranteed 3 starters and 2 openers. We found out last season that was just not a good idea. You can't immediately throw the bullpen in the games. It has to be more of a situational thing where a starter gets hurt or you decide a starter needs more rest. I honestly think you will see a 6-man rotation next year before you see 3 starters and 2 openers again, or even 4 and 2 openers, just because it really didn't work out. The bullpen got tired. We saw injuries. We showed the value in having starting pitching last year when Morton was by himself and Chirinos and Yarborough really stepped up. And you need innings eaters. And I know the guy who starts the game doesn't need to be the one who pitches the most. But
That's
by
true.
being the
Yeah.
starter, having to pitch the most innings, you guarantee you use the minimum number of pitchers possible, because an opener basically guarantees a minimum of 2 pitchers per game. And if you're using,
if not more, usually more.
if not more, it's normally like 6 or 7 per game, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, the 3 batter minimum will definitely change a lot of that. But it's a situation where you have to use the guys who know how to pitch a lot of innings. I know that sounds like a really dumb way to put it, and I know the numbers say the opener works. We have to remember these are human beings who get tired, they get hurt, and sometimes the numbers just don't reflect the fact that getting tired is a thing, and you have to compensate for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head there. I mean, the fact of the matter is, with an opener, you are using so many pitchers, and you can only use them so many nights in a row before eventually they're just exhausted. So I think going to a point where you do have a traditional rotation where you can have guys that eat up innings, with a traditional starter that can take you 6 or 7 innings, then you throw only 1 or 2 relievers out there and you finish a game having only thrown 2 or 3 pitchers is very valuable, especially when you do want to have days or nights where you do have the opener and have 6 or 7 pitchers out there, because if you can give them that night off where you have a starter that goes so many innings, then you'll have to use 1 or 2 more pitchers. It's incredibly valuable.
Agreed. And especially with Brendan McKay coming, I definitely can see a value in 6 starters too. Think about it. Imagine a situation where starters can go deeper into games because they have that extra day off instead of 5 days, it's 6 days. I don't know why that was so hard to think up.
Well, I think that someone who could definitely benefit from that is Charlie Morton. I mean, obviously 36 years old, he's not getting any younger. I think, an extra day off each week could do someone like him a lot of good.
You'll also finally see a complete game for the first time since May of 2016 for the Rays. I was actually at that game.
Were you really?
Yeah, Matt Andries' complete game against the Oakland A's was the most recent complete game for the Rays back in 2016. I was there. The only reason I know I was there is because it's the most recent one. There have been 2 complete games since Kevin Cash has taken over as manager. It was Chris Archer against the Astros on August 20th, 2015, and then you have the one in May of 2016 with Matt Andries.
I hear names like Matt Andries, and it's just so weird to hear old Rays, man. It's I know that's kind of weird to say, but I mean, it's just like I completely forget these guys ever existed until I, eventually hear their names again. Like Matt Andries, Alex Cobb. I don't even remember half these guys existed until I hear their names, so it's kind of crazy like that. But anyway, so Drew Smiley got traded to Seattle. I forgot about him too. So I mean, it's crazy. We'll see what happens. I do think that there is a spot for an opener on this Rays team, or I think it's something that they will bring back. And I'm a fan of Chirinos. I'm a fan of Yarborough, but we'll ultimately see what Kevin Cash wants to do with that rotation. But let's keep moving, Harrison. We did talk about this briefly last time. The MLB is not the only league with reopening plans. So are the NHL and NBA. The NBA is kind of interesting to me in that, let's talk about both leagues. Both leagues have announced, intentions to open up practice facilities in the near future. The NBA was supposed to happen on May 1st, but I think it got pushed back to May 4th with possible, with also it being possible they could push back even further. The NHL just recently announced that they have intentions of opening up their practice facilities to players beginning in mid-May.
Well, for the NBA, I've actually heard May 8th is the return since the May 1st. Yeah, May 8th. So it's already further than you just said.
My mistake.
The NBA's been really weird. They were the first to have to suspend because they had the most players with coronavirus cases right out of the gate, as in they had any.
Mm-hmm.
The NHL's had a couple of too, but just no notable names.
A couple guys for Ottawa, a couple guys for Colorado, and that's it.
And Ottawa.
I said Ottawa and Colorado.
Oh, sorry, I missed the Ottawa.
You're good. But so it's so with these practice facilities when they open, obviously they're going to be strictly implementing social distancing for the players and the staff. I believe only a few players will be allowed inside at a time. I think the NBA said 4 players on a court at one point in time, or at any point in time. So they're really going to minimize how often and how much time and who or how many players are going to be allowed to use these facilities at one point at one time.
At least during the quote-unquote phase 1 a lot of states are going through right now. Of course, you can't do 2-on-2 pickup games because it defeats the purpose of social distancing. I think you could set up a schedule where, 4 go in from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m., another 4 go in 8 to 9, and so on. Maybe you have 1 or 2 coaches in there with a mask at a distance monitoring them. It's going to be a lot of specific drills, and maybe by the time states get to phase 2, they could play a couple of pickup games. It'll be interesting. The NBA is just in a weird situation where they had a 25-day return plan, then they were coming back May 1st, and now they're coming back May 8th. They really – and at one point they were even flirting with just no season at all, which we know is not happening anymore. Some say they'll be the first to be back. I'm not sure. Right now they seem to be the ones who are the most up in the air, in my opinion.
I can agree with that. The NBA, it's odd. I mean, it's the May 1st. The reason I don't think the May 1st plan necessarily worked out the way they wanted is because I do believe they received some backlash, and ultimately they were like, well, okay, let's just push it back. I don't know if the NBA is really on board with doing this without receiving, I guess maybe say full support. So it's interesting with the NBA. I mean, I know the NHL has not announced a specific date yet, but I think if they're going to have seasons, this needs to happen for both leagues. These guys got to start getting back into their drills, into their workouts, as particularly with NHL players. They got to get back to skating. You can do as many workouts as you want, but it doesn't exactly – it comes nowhere near close to the impact. It doesn't match the impact that actual skating has. So, they can do everything they want, but until these guys get into the practice facilities and start working with their coaches and doing their drills again, we're no closer to returning at all with some of these sports.
At least, though, for hockey – just by the nature of the game, it's a little bit easier to return and do some of those things. Hockey players, they're more covered because of their jerseys and tall socks. They wear visors. You add a face mask to that, and you're in pretty good shape. It's not the same as bouncing into someone in the NBA where you're sleeveless, sweat touches each other. You got to be a little more cautious with that one. And again, I'm just talking about this just because of the nature of how the game is with uniforms and play and everything. And the NHL also has a couple ideas. They're thinking of returning in July. They've already talked about how they're willing to start next season in December just so they can finish out this season, have a condensed off season, and get straight back into it with a shortened next season so they can keep the original cycle.
Well, I've even heard that the NHL has considered pushing the start of their regular season back to December of this season. So of this year, but for next season. So I mean, that would really, I don't know how that impacts the schedule. I know that they mentioned cutting out the All-Star break, cutting out some off weekends, this and that. But I mean, December's a late start for a season that typically begins in October. I mean, the further that this goes, the further that they have to delay next season. And I am not sure how much the NHL is willing to risk with this year to completely, I know that next year, saving next season and having a full 82-game schedule is a priority, as it should be. So the question, I guess, at this point is how far do they go until eventually they either finally come up with a plan, or B, just scratch it and cancel the season? Because ultimately, I'm not sure the NHL is thrilled about the idea of starting their games in December. I know for a fact that they don't want to do it in January. So I've said this with the MLB. I'm going to say with the NBA and NHL. You got to start coming out with these plans quickly, because the further you delay it, the further that you're just going to push back next season, and that's not going to be good for anyone.
Well, Commissioner Gary Bettman of the NHL is very open to December games. If you start in December, you are not having an 82-game season. I think the NHL needs to accept that fact that next season is already completely going to have to be changed because of this one disrupted season. You know,
Assuming that you do want to finish this season, of course, which I am under. I'm same as the MLB. I'm optimistic that these leagues are going to have seasons into the summer, and that there are going to be games played well into the summer, even if you don't wrap up the season until say late August or early September. That just might be the case, but I mean, it's just starting a season in December. I don't see any way that that's going to work without cutting the season short, even if it is just a little bit by like 10 or 15 games.
and I think that's what they're going to have to do unless you completely wipe your hands clean on this season or you have like 2 rounds of the playoffs with no regular season games. That's just it. They're probably going to have to accept that. They might do some back-to-back games with no all-star break next season, try to get up to 70-something games. But I think an 82-game season in either the NBA or the NHL is just not happening. Baseball's lucky that they don't start again until February or March for spring training. They can still play in November, the short and off season, get back to normal. Football is planning still actually to go as planned with fans in the stands, actually. But, with the season not starting until September, they can always make changes. You can't necessarily make the changes and decide, just kidding. So, and again, there's everything we're talking about, we really don't know anything official. It's all speculation and the information leaked to the public. But if you want to reset everything and make sure everything's on its normal cycle without permanently changing the NBA or NHL schedule, you have to shorten next season. And it's not really that crazy because we've had shortened seasons before for other purposes.
You're absolutely right. We have had shortened seasons due to strikes, lockouts, things of that nature. Obviously, never really anything like this has really impacted a season the way the coronavirus has impacted all these seasons. But I'm wondering if we're past the point of almost no return with these leagues where they haven't canceled their seasons up to this point. It's been nearly 2 months since their seasons got put on hold, and with them not canceling them, are we too far deep to where at this point they just have to go forward and finish their seasons, and ultimately it's just going to impact next year, maybe years beyond that, until they can finally get back to a normal cycle. I'm wondering if we're at that point, now, to where they're just that far in to where there's no really turning back and saying, oh yeah, we are going to cancel the season, because then people are just going to ask, well, why didn't you do that months ago?
For sure. I mean, for the plan right now isn't even to play for 2 more months after this. So when the season resumes, it would have been 4 months of being on hold. Your entire off season just happened.
Exactly.
And resume something that has been on hold since March 12th.
Exactly.
It's hard to say. I mean, you could definitely make an argument. I think I'll agree they're at the point of return when it comes to let's just call it quits. And I get it. Back in March and April, the idea of canceling the season made sense, but at the same time it didn't. We don't know how this virus is going to work out. People are returning to their normal lives a little bit, whether or not you agree with that. It's happening. And
many states are showing signs of improvement. In terms
New York,
of a second wave. I know many people feel that it's all but certain at this point. I mean, we'll see what happens. So obviously, every state that opens up needs to be extremely cautious with the way they do it. But it does seem like people are starting to return to a little bit of their normal daily lives. Obviously, the path to normalcy is going to be a long one. We don't necessarily know how it's going to work out or how long it's going to take. There is some return with reopening states, things like that, but how far do you want to push it?
Yeah. And you mentioned a second wave. That's always definitely a scary possibility. A second wave that happened during the Spanish flu led to the cancellation of the 1919 Stanley Cup Finals in the middle of it. We could make an argument that by the time a second wave comes, we have better treatments and a vaccine, and it's nothing to worry about. And for all we know, none of that happens. A second wave hits just as hard or harder than the one we just had, and we have to go back into lockdown. Or maybe we have no choice but to just ride it out with no lockdown. I don't know. It's
Above our pay
definitely
grade, Harrison. It's above our pay grade to make these decisions, but
I'm
I
not
think
making
it's
any decisions.
definitely
I'm speculating.
it's something these leagues need to be mindful of. Is something like that, like a second wave possibly hitting, because you are on lockdown right now, and obviously these leagues want to return to play. They want to get things rolling again, but say things are going better, and then by September or October, the second wave comes. The NFL's got to, the NFL has to deal with it at that point. If you haven't finished up your the MLB season, they got to go back in a shutdown. The NHL and NBA might be able to get away with it, with finishing their seasons if they can finish them by August or September. Then at that point, they're in off-season mode and they can kind of figure it out. But it's something that these leagues do have to be mindful of, is second wave, and obviously no one's going to open up without it being signed off by health experts, and until they know that it's safe to do so. But there's a whole lot more questions than answers right now, and we've talked about it for weeks. It's been the same thing. More questions than answers. We don't know how things pan out with the coronavirus, and that's just going to keep being the case, unfortunately, until more information's out there and until things eventually pan out.
Yeah, and I honestly rather be, for the time being, that there are more questions than answers, just because we're asking questions and trying to figure this out than just being set foot on this is the solution and nothing else, just because it's such a brand new disease that we've never experienced, and it makes a lot of people sick. Sure, the odds you get over it are very, very high, but you could be asymptomatic, affect someone with asthma or something, you lose the person, just to keep that, layman's terms, and you don't know. It's a very
No one
sad,
really knows.
scary
Ultimately,
situation.
are the odds in a lot of people's favor? Yes, but you don't want to be that person who either A, doesn't make it, who doesn't, isn't in that 98, 99% that is going to survive. And also, you don't want to be the person that gives it to someone who might have, um, health issues already, who might not, who might be a little more high risk. So, and these leagues are mindful of that. And obviously, they're not going to do anything where they put people at risk. And with the second wave as a real possibility, it's something that obviously a lot of commissioners and owners of teams and things like that have in the back of their mind, which is why, I think obviously this is taking as long as it is in terms of teams in leagues making decisions. But, going back to the original point, I do believe that we are past the point where these leagues can just kind of wrap it up, call it a season, and just say it's canceled. I think we're past that. I think a month and a half, 2 months later, it's not looking like that's going to be what's going to be the reality. I do think we're going to have a lot of these leagues finish their seasons out, and it's just a matter of when at this point.
Exactly, and because of all the issues, I'm willing to make a bet that despite what the NFL says or what they're hopeful for towards the end of the season, there's not a single sporting event with fans in 2020. And by that, I mean major sporting events. Sure, there might be people who could watch the Masters or something from a distance, but that's just an example. But
it's hard to
I gotta
argue.
say,
With the vaccine not supposed to be on schedule to come until probably 2021's winter or spring of 2021,
at the earliest.
that looks like a real possibility at this point. So we just don't know. Obviously, like I said, more questions than answers at this point, but we'll get our answers over the coming months. But it's hard right now to see a reality where there's fans in the stands this year.
Yeah, and just to clarify those who are listening, we are fully aware that neither of us are doctors, but we still feel it's somewhat important to have this discussion. It's just
Right.
it's just wrong if we don't. We can't just act like, sports are this immoral thing. Clearly they're not, because
and also, when we
I
talk
could
about
word
it,
that better, but you know what I mean.
Sports have been affected so much, as well as other realms of life and families, and just things that happen in everyday life. Sports have been affected, so that's ultimately what makes it relevant in a sports podcast. Is how does it affect these leagues? How does it affect these teams? And that's what we come to talk about.
Yeah, and hopefully this eventually comes to an end. We have normal sports to talk about, normal life. We can even talk about games we've been to. That might not even be till episode 50. Hopefully we get to that point. I would love to. Hopeful. I want to stay hopeful. I want to be able to say in a podcast I saw a Blake Snell shutout in person, or I was at a Lightning playoff game, or that I got to see Breeze versus Brady or Rogers. Brady versus Breeze or Rogers. I'll take any of those, honestly. I'll go in a hazmat suit if I really had to, but it's not the safest choice. I know that.
Hey, hopeful and optimistic, man. That's the theme for this. But with that, Harrison, man, I'm gonna let you go, man. I'm gonna get rid of you. It's been another great episode of SS Tampa Bay. Everyone out there, stay healthy, stay safe, and overall stay hopeful and optimistic like we are. And Harrison, I'll see you next time, buddy.